Okay, we are here for episode, I think 6, yeah? Soul Purpose Conversation. Uh, Jan and I are here to have a deep conversation around soul purpose, around the mind and personality and essence. And I think this conversation is something, Jan, I feel like people can really lean into listening to podcasts, which is this can be a good podcast conversation because it's something that's underneath of what many people are focusing on a day-to-day living. When I look at the majority of people are focusing on the material realm, right? The activity, the to-do list, and thinking about the people around them, like family, coworkers, friends. And I think I would love for this, the conversation space for people to be an opportunity to actually turn their attention inwards and a path to discover who they are and who they're here to express. So, um, in this soul purpose conversation, I'm not the one who decide the topic. Jan is. So Jan is gonna reveal this week's topic. Um, Before you share that, though, Jan, can I ask you what led you to want to talk about this? Because there must be a path and something that happened in your life that led you to want to focus on this today.
Yeah. Thanks, Yuki. I think the topic is something along the lines of I'm wondering if there is perhaps a specific lesson that each of us, a classroom that is designed specifically for us to learn, and why. Because through my nutrition coaching and even observing my friends and myself, and I noticed that people can be absolutely okay in many areas of their life. Like some people, it's a catastrophe everywhere. Some people, but for the most part, most people can they can be quote unquote successful in most areas of their life. But there seems to be one area that they really really struggle with, and I've identified it into through my own observations into like some people just can't have they can be really successful, whatever, a surgeon or a lawyer or something, but they really struggle to have a successful relationship. And another person could also be a surgeon or a lawyer or whatever, but they really struggle with food. They just can't come right with food or exercise or get it, looking after their body or something like that. And then, or the other side is that they could have a wonderful family. The relationships are good, but they really struggle to make money. And it's just and the hallmark of this is that, to give you an example, a friend of mine was a friend and ex-client of mine was telling me almost in the same conversation that she was telling me about an experience that she had where she was at a baby shower and surrounded by like cake and sugar, and she was trying to eat better and trying to look after her health and lose some weight or whatever, and really struggling with that. Like really, it was messy for her and lots of craving and really tough to be in that experience. But then when we connected on the coaching call, she was telling me about, in a different sort of way, it wasn't connected. I'm the one who connected it, but she mentioned having this really nice, expensive glass of wine with her dad, and then how lovely it was to be in that moment. And so the contrast between the two, the one is like a baby shower that caused her absolute storm inside, chaos. And then the other one is this glass of wine with her dad sitting on the couch, just having a good conversation. And that's it. One glass of wine and no obsession, no challenge to stop myself to have more, anything like that. And it's just interesting that for me is that like how, and I've heard people talk about it with money or with relationships or with food. It's always the same language. It's this utter turmoil that goes on for them internally. And someone mentioned to me once that sort of poked something for me around a book that they read called Divine Contract or something, that you choose your parents before you come here, that, essentially you create the classroom that you're going to come into before you come here. And it's all highly theoretical, I guess, or we can just have a conversation around this as a topic because I think it's interesting.
Yeah. You know, so what comes up for me when you said what you said is some people are really not having any issue with the health, right? No injuries, no illness. And in the department of health, they're thriving, means that there's no lack, but they're experiencing abundance. But having some relationship, reoccurring relationship issue, like for instance, attractive narcissist. I hear that very often, right?
Mm-hmm.
But then the work is doing good, right? Whereas others, they're having a thriving, stable, grounding relationship, but having reoccurring health or injuries. Or some people have all of those are good, but they have no idea how to do the work that they're here to do or to have a financial increase, right? Like when we look at from, I want to look at that from actually two different points of view, right?
Mm-hmm.
One is, what if begin looking at all of those just from the perspective of lack and plenty, right? It's full and complete versus lack and plenty, because that's what it is, right? We can identify in the health department illness, wellness, no injuries. In the money department, a lot of money coming in towards you, or survival mode because there's a lack of money. Or in the relationship with department, you are having a good connection with people, or you're having argument or some sort of um, hurting themselves emotionally, right? So those are a different language that we can apply to different departments. But from an energetic standpoint, it's just a matter of whether you are experiencing expansion, abundance, versus lack and limitation. Yeah. Then, if all those traits or the relationship with the world gets constructed through the early stage in our life, mingling with our parents and our surrounding, we can look at, okay, because no parents are, everything that happens is perfect, but from the lens of the mind, no parents are perfect, right? Parents do not know what they're actually doing to program their children until
Mm-hmm.
they do, right?
Mm-hmm.
Until they realize and until they learn the function of the mind. So when we understand that all children are being surrounded by parents who, one, fully aware of how each and every consequence and behaviors and situation impact to create a sense of lack inside of the children, then we could understand why people go through and experience what they experience in life. That's the one piece of that perspective that I want to take a look at. And then another one is when you talk about divine contract, Gary Zukav is also somebody who says that soul chooses when it comes, chooses when it goes. So when somebody, make a transition and shift out of this physical dimension, whatever that happens, even what we call accident, like a car accident, that's actually soul choosing, right? Because in the dimension of the soul, my interpretation is that there's no past, present, but it's just is. So you can actually there's no order. So you mentioned a moment ago, um, maybe that wasn't when we were recording, before recording, when we're chatting, that we choose our parents, right? The soul chooses our parents. And that sounds like contradictory when we think of the timeline, past, present, future, because parents comes first and children comes later. But those conversation doesn't matter for the dimension of the soul because there's no before or after. So then it makes sense that soul chooses when it comes, when it goes, because in the mind, we can say it's a divine contract, and that's an interesting terminology. And it's difficult for the mind to hear, but I do believe it's kind of like a beyond belief, Ian, actually. I feel I know that we're here to do something what we are meant to do. Does that
Mhm.
make sense? We
Mhm.
came here to do something that we're meant to do. Because if we didn't come here to do the things that we're meant to do, everything is just random.
So then my question to you, my favorite question is always,
Yeah.
right, but I'll elaborate on it. But the question is why? But
Yeah.
the elaboration is, then how come if the soul is here to experience and it doesn't differentiate between good and bad experiences, and we have choice, or I'm just running through it in my mind, then why do we get in our own way? Why do people have these challenges in relationship, or in financial belief, or in safety, relationship, or status sort of? Why is there this stumbling block to us expressing what we were meant to express?
Hmm. Hmm. So the first thing that comes to my mind is that we are identifying the lack as a challenge, right? When somebody's in pain, not having what they desire, it's limiting their free expression, right? It's inevitable to have that, and we cannot not have that. So somebody is going to have some sort of lack experience, limited experience, painful experience in some sort of area of their life. And the reason that we have that is because that's the nature of this realm, which I often express that the physical realm is the relative realm, which the contextual field is, which is a Neil's language. I think it's Neil's language, right? So you cannot the process of the journey of the soul, Jan, is to remember who we are. And then in order for us to begin even walking the path of remembering who we are, we must first forget who we are, right? So then, in order for us to do things and experience things what we want, we need to run into what we don't want in order to actually experience
Ah.
what we want. So that's the perspective of the soul and the essence, that you don't actually, when we understand that in order to remember who we are, we must first forget who we are. In order to align with what we want, first we must go through what we don't want. In order to feel pleasure, we must go through the pain in order to really truly experience the pleasure. When we understand that that's the rhythm and the mechanism of this physical world, you begin looking at all the pains and challenges and struggle from the perspective of the essence soul, which allows us to resist less because you know that that's why you're going through it. That doesn't mean that that pain can turn into fun immediately. Pain remains pain, but the way in which we relate to that becomes completely different, less resistance, and then, but the pain enables us to tune inwards, right? If the pain didn't exist, it didn't give us an opportunity to tune inwards, means that it didn't guide us to begin focusing on remembering walking the path of remembering, right? So that's one segment. Another segment, you said, why are we getting in the way? We get in
Mm.
the way when we demonstrate the misidentification of the I as the mind. We only get in the way when we assume that we are the mind. But then we try to solve using the mind. That's why we get in the way, because the mind is not who we are. So one of the get in the way is healing the past thing, healing the wound thing, right? The reason that I personally am not a big fan of trying to heal the past is because the moment you engage in that activity, you're misidentifying yourself as your story, but you are a spiritual being, which none of the stories belong to that essence. And I also see the influence of the Enneagram Type 9. So, those who are unfamiliar who are watching this, Enneagram is a quote unquote personality type, but the 9 is the core of all type, which all of us carry the type 9. And the core message of type 9 is asleepness.
Mm.
Right? Having a hard time waking up means that having a hard time remembering who we are. We can temporarily think of, oh, I'm not the mind, I'm not the body, but then we kind of slip right back into living yourself inside of the mind. And
Mm.
I think that challenge is a part of the process for a lot of people. But here's the thing though. Once you really begin honing in the awareness that you are much much bigger than your story, and then yourself is connected to the whole, it's difficult to go back to the old way. So once you flip and experience the other side, it's difficult to slip back. You might slip back once in a while, but you can notice and quickly shift out of it. And I think it takes a little bit time for a lot of people because most people are not surrounded living from that perspective,
Mm.
which is the reason that I feel good about creating all this content. Because what I would love for what I would love to see is for people to be listening to this in their car all the time, right?
Mhm.
People need to be surrounded by this information long enough for them to shift out of living inside of the mind, because the general public are not awake.
Yeah.
98% of the people, this is one of my favorite books. I don't know if I share with you. The Only Thing That Matters by Neil.
Uh,
This book talks about the journey of the soul, and he talks about 98% of the people in the world are focusing 98% of the time for the thing that doesn't matter, which is the 2% is to begin understanding that we are awareness, soul, and begin living from that place.
yeah. Too focused on the outside.
Yeah, to focus on the outside, to focus on the repetitive mind, in the mind start taking over, focusing on the activities and doing and having, and they forget living from that presence.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So just to come back to the individual classroom,
The visual classroom. Yes.
um, okay, so yeah, with no blame at all to the parents. Uh, so the what happens to us in relation to our parents creates the wound that or the challenge that we go through, um, that that allows us to go inward so that we can wake up and then express our purpose. The interesting thing about that is, when I was a little kid, I didn't have a particularly normal childhood, and quote unquote normal. Um, I was left to my own devices pretty much. I could do whatever I wanted. I could come and go as I pleased. I was sort of like a Peter Pan, if I wanted to talk
What's
about
the
it in a
age?
really nice.
What's the
Hey,
what's the age that you're talking about?
younger than 10, like my childhood.
Uh-huh.
And so I was never told when to have a bath or do your homework or even to go to school. I mean, it was really challenging for my mum, because the school was always phoning her and saying, Jan's not here.
Mhm.
Uh, and we don't need to get into the reasons why for any of this, but when I encountered other people's parents, I I would go and visit them or whatever, and then it was like, okay, we're gonna have dinner now. Okay, it's time for everyone to bath. Okay, now please do your homework. And I found it very bizarre. I couldn't, but I also sort of, on some level, I wanted it, I guess. But I very much enjoyed my independence. Strangely, anyway, I digress. I'm friends with some of those people still, and even though probably a psychologist would say that I had a very neglectful childhood, and I have every reason to have baggage or trauma or whatever. Many of those people who I believed at the time of my youth, who had wonderful parents, are all in therapy because of their parents. So even if you had a perfect upbringing from a societal perspective, your parents are still going to be your greatest point of growth in life. There's still going to be, because the mind of it, or the experience of a child, just doesn't compute this stuff the same way. So from the outside, we're like, oh, he's got great parents, he'll be fine. But that kid, there's some sort of lack of attunement or something that's happening for him in his relation to his parents, that he will end up in therapy for, that will become his part of his awakening, which I think is interesting. Another sort of aspect of this, just to wrap it up, was, another story from when I was a child was my stepmother. She for a long time couldn't have her own children, and because of what was happening for me at home, I used to love going and staying at my father's house when I was a little kid, because she used to spoil me and give me lots of energy and love and stuff. And then she had her first child, and this is what I'm talking about. The experience of a child was, I felt completely abandoned, right? And nobody explained it to me at the time. And it was only years later, when I was sitting in a rehab with a drug counselor telling them this story, that she said to me, she goes, but don't you think that she had her hands full with this new infant? And but as a child, I didn't have that logical understanding. I just felt abandoned, right?
Mhm.
So, and then I 20, 30 years later, sitting in therapy, talking about this thing that I'd been carrying with me, this perception that I created as a young child. you know, and it's interesting uh, this topic of because it's so easy for us to blame the parents. Um,
Yeah.
but nobody's at fault because it's a necessary mechanism. It doesn't matter if you had a traumatic childhood or you had a quote unquote perfect childhood. Somehow your relationship to your parents in those early years is going to create the hole that you're going to try and fill in some way.
You know, I also feel that Jan, it's even before that, like not any context of conversation of how you perceive with the parents, but
Mm,
actually how you are held or
mm,
not held, or the state of the mind that your mothers or your caregiver were in when they were holding you. Because
mhm,
if, let's say, if the mother was anxious and feeling worried about something and then getting distracted with the thoughts and holding, imagine that when the subconscious mind is fully open, it means that they were much more empathic, not knowing that they are, right? So they receive energy because they don't have the logic to prevent, to not to let that energy come in. So it's almost like until the conscious mind is being formed, the babies and children are almost like in the state of hypnosis, right? So if you're holding the baby and the mother is having a thought and emotions, and you can feel the energy of that mother, the baby was absorbing all of those. So let's say
mm,
if somebody had a tendency to be worried about all the time, and then because the baby was crying, baby, you're just gonna hold the baby, but the mind is in that worriness, and then the baby was absorbing all those lack energetics, right?
mm,
And I don't know how many mothers are aware of that, right? When they interact, not interact through the conversation, but because the touch is the most physical, most powerful communication for the baby,
mm,
until they start understanding what words means, right? Because they can feel it, then that creates a pivotal foundation of how the baby creates fullness versus something that's missing. Let's say we have different like phases in our life, right? From 0 to 10, the need and the focus of that phase in life is nurturing, growing, right? When 10 to 20, you start having a different needs, right? 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, each decades have different needs and focus in our lifespan. What the baby needs the most is to be held, so the baby can feel plenty and abundance. But if, because they don't know how to do that on their own, because they don't have that ability to think,
mm,
then it needs to come from the outside to receive those experience. And
mm,
when, if that was absent, that's how we create whole, the HOLE, inside of
mm,
us. Then if something is missing that didn't get nurtured at the early stage, we start subconsciously seeking to fill that hole from the outside. And that's how a lot of stuff manifests as a behavior. um, so coming back to your nutrition thing that you mentioned, I had somebody who I worked with a long time ago who was craving chocolate all the time. Yeah. And she was a widow, right? So the absence of the connection with the loved one that she ended because of the transition made her want to feel that sweetness, that leading her to pick up chocolate all the time. So that was the story of her, right? So
mm,
we all have at some extent something that is lacking internally, that is showing up and manifesting as a way of thinking, the thinking patterns and the behaviors in life to fill that gap inside of us. And I think it's important, it's healthy to recognize what that is, so we can, once you recognize what that is, you will not continue to try to feel it, but you will find a way to feel that differently. And I think that understanding and awareness is a game changer, because otherwise the world becomes a place to feel what's lacking inside instead of giving something to, because you're already
Mm,
full, right? So that
mm,
sort of lead us to this conversation of like a giving and receiving. Many people wants to receive subconsciously because they are they believe, the body believes that they don't have one, right?
mm.
But if your nurturing is enough and strong, because you already have one, you want to give. And I think that's where the true joy lies. When we start understanding that we have plenty and abundance inside of us, and we want to work on that through the awareness practice, but to be able to give um, effortlessly, however much we want to, then it becomes a joy, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, that the only thought afterwards is I want to give more,
Yeah. Yeah.
not any sort of checks and balances or, worrying about what's being left, the hole left behind by the giving.
Mm-hmm.
I,
It, it'll
I,
be
hey?
it'll be interesting though when the entire world start believing that they have it all because we live in an abundant universe, and then how the behavior and the thinking pattern will change when they don't feel that they need anything because they already have enough.
Yeah, it'll be very interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. That was, I don't have any more questions. That was perfectly answered.
Great.
I think the part that stood out for me, Yuki, was, because I knew a lot of what you were talking about, but the two significant things was that the pain makes us go inward so that we can realize who we truly are or remember who we truly are. And then you said the 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 stumbling block or the way that we get in our own way is also so that we realize how not to be.
Mm.
Um, well, I think the language that you like to use more often is uh, uh, um, in order to know who we are, we must first know who we are not.
Yeah.
Something like that.
Yeah. I think a lot of people do not recognize, because it's kind of interesting. We tend to take advantage, not take advantage, take it for granted of the pain or the lack, because what we want is the absence of it. But then,
Yeah.
yeah, understanding the nature of the physical world, you can only experience that when you experience the opposite of it. So once you truly get that, and then once you truly get what the soul is doing here on earth, I think we can take a lot of things much, much lighter, right? Yeah. Yeah. Great.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course. Thank you. This was episode 6. Yeah. We're going to come back to Jan is going to come up with a theme every week, and we're going to continue to present a different soul purpose conversation. We have a soul purpose group that's I think we're gonna reach almost 700 people. No, I'm just checking. Yeah, right now, as at the time of this recording, we are 694.
Oh, wow.
Yeah,
So maybe by the time I wake up tomorrow, we'll be at 700.
yeah, and then we're recording this on July 22nd. The group was launched on August 8th, so we gotta do a year anniversary. Actually, that's how I feel like.
Yeah.
Right. Anybody who is watching this, if you have any question, feel free to comment below. I would love to hear actually what people are kind of absorbing, and I know some of the conversation that we're talking about is pretty deep, but that's the intention to make everybody stop and begin thinking deeply their direction in life, the vision and the circumstance. And I think the message that I want to leave everybody with is that no matter where people are, it doesn't really matter. What matters is to begin the journey of exploring who we are. And then I feel like once you're lined up with how you're here to express truly, everything else in our life start lining up, because the way that I see is life is a feedback and the mirror of constantly informing us to align. And I think once we anchor ourselves in that, everything else will fall into place. So coming back here and having different conversation, uh, our vision is speaking this topic from a different angle, so something can land uh, for you, because I often share one topic from a multiple angle, so some people can hear differently, right? Um, and then I think a good thing is to continue to come back to this conversation, because the more you immerse yourself in the spiritual conversation, the deeper inside of you start wanting to express, and that's what our intention is. So that's it, everybody. Thank you, Jan, and thank you,
Thanks.
everybody. We'll see you next week for the exciting topic. We'll show you.